Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days growing up in Idaho. Hello everyone, welcome to Growing Up in Idaho, talking about the good old days. I hope everyone is doing well today. I'm really excited about today's show. For the past few months, I've wanted to do a series of shows about the cool and crappy jobs we all did as kids growing up on ranches and farms and in the country. Most of us had no idea there were child labor laws in those days, and I argue neither did our bosses. Think of all the jobs you had as a kid. Now, I'm not talking about cleaning your bedroom or taking out the garbage for your mom. I'm talking about working for the man, making money. I was a teenager in the 1970s and early 80s. So that's the period of time I'm familiar with, but I'm sure some of you have stories from long before that of cool and crappy jobs you had as kids. My brother and I, like nearly every kid in town, moved our share of sprinkler pipes, milked our share of cows, and bucked our share of hay bales. But this show is going to focus mainly on those cool and crappy jobs that were a little more unique to the average Idaho kid. I realized by the 8th grade that I wanted my own money. So I got a wild hair one day and called my Uncle Ralph and asked if there was a place for me in his restaurant. Perhaps some of you have heard of Wally's Cafe in Salmon. In its heyday, it was one of the premier eating establishments in town. Uncle Ralph Young gave me my first job interview over the phone. I was 13 years old at the time. Ralph was a quiet sort of man, but very direct when he needed to be. He said, "Can you work hard and keep your mouth shut and get your work done?" "Yes, Uncle Ralph," I said. "Will you do what you're asked to do and not mouth off or be a smart aleck?" "Yes." "Okay. Come down here tomorrow after school. We need another dishwasher. Think you can do that?" "Yep, I'll do it. I'll do anything that pays." So that's how I got my first official crappy job as a kid. I earned $2.30 an hour, and just as valuable as that measly $2.30 an hour was the fact I got a free meal for every 4-hour shift I worked. And on top of that, I got all the pop I could drink. As a 13-year-old kid, that food and all the Coca-Cola I wanted was as good as gold, in my opinion. Uncle Ralph was the best short-order cook in the whole U.S. Northwest in those days. Everything on the menu was fantastic, and I had a bottomless pit for a stomach. Ralph was also the first man, besides my dad, who taught me the value of working hard and working smart. Ralph was a good man, and I miss him and Aunt Sherry. They were good people to work for, and I cherish the time I spent working with them in that restaurant. But you know, a few years before I went to work washing dishes in the restaurant, I was a tree pusher for my dad in his time as a logger one summer. And that, if you can believe it, was even more crappy than dishwashing. My brother and I were Dad's right-hand men as he felled trees the summer of 76 or 77. It was our job to take turns pushing trees as he cut them, helping them fall in the right direction. Dad knew what he was doing with his saw, felling those trees, and probably didn't need any of our help, making sure they fell in the direction he intended, but he wanted us with him, and what better place to keep an eye on us than if we were right there fighting over whose turn it was to push the next tree. We each had a hard hat, a pair of leather gloves, and an 8-foot pole with a spike in the end. After Dad got his notch cut made and was about halfway through his back cut, he would give us the signal and we would start pushing the tree in the direction of the fall path. As soon as it started to fall, we would get the crap out of the way in case the trunk bounced or swung back. Logging is a crappy job, and it's dangerous. Falling trees are often unpredictable. As I mentioned, the trunks often swing and bounce when the tree hits the ground. If you're not paying attention, You could be killed, or worse. That's not to mention all the branches flying or falling that could knock you unconscious if you got in the way. But for those who have done this type of work, you know there is some satisfaction in knowing you've accomplished something that's relatively dangerous and lived through it to tell about it. Kids doing dangerous things in those days was as common as kids driving cars. We had an old yellow International pickup sitting in the field that we used for hauling firewood for winter. Dad told my brother and me to get in that truck and drive it around the mountain roads near the house so we could get used to the clutch. Well, he didn't have to ask us twice. Most kids our age had their own cars, or at least a family car or pickup they were allowed to drive, long before they enrolled in driver's ed when they turned 14. To that point, our driver's ed teacher told us if he caught anybody driving their cars to class, he would flunk them. I know he looked the other way more than once, so he wouldn't have to flunk any kids. Most of those kids needed to drive to get to work after school. It's just how it was in those days. There were quite a few 12 and 13-year-old drivers out on the road. Talk about dangerous. Anyway, I considered myself lucky to eventually get one of the coolest jobs of any kid in town. When I was 15, I landed the job as line boy at the airport, working for a guy named Richard Disney, who owned the Salmon Air Taxi at the time. I was in charge of doing light maintenance on all the company airplanes, changing the oil and making sure they were all gassed up and ready to fly. I was also in charge of mowing the runway and keeping the runway lights working and running the fuel pumps. On top of that, I did whatever I was asked to do, often stuff that nobody else wanted to do. You know how that goes. So I pulled a few turbos out of the Cessnas when they needed it. I stripped paint, I degreased parts, painted the hangar, and even did some airframe riveting and reconstruction. Let me tell you about that. We got a new mechanic who was hired to be a temporary hand to our head guy Larry, so he could catch up on some of his work around the shop. The new guy claimed he was a pro airframe guy and could do about anything with an engine. He must have gotten amnesia the first day on the job because he didn't know jack crap, and he proved it when he had to be reminded how to do a compression check on the cylinders in one of the planes, something that any mechanic should know how to do. Anyway, not long after that, he did a rivet job on the wing of our Beechcraft twin. Larry came over to me and said, "Hey, Jeff, go check out that guy's riveting job. Tell me what you think." As I walked over and checked it out, even an amateur like me knew it was really bad. It looked to me like something from a Dr. Seuss book, like some little kid had been cut loose with the wrong sized rivets and a ball-peen hammer. Larry stood there with his hands on his hips and stared at that job for a few seconds. Then he looked over at me and said, "Think you can clean that mess up?" "Well, couldn't do much worse, I guess," I said. So as a teenager, I learned true artistry and craftsmanship from Larry, and I've never forgotten some of those important things he taught me. That same year, when I was 15, I bought a 67 Chevelle Supersport from my good friend Richard Putnam. As often as I could afford it, I ran ethyl gasoline in that car, just to make it go faster and run hotter. I was always trying for a personal best time and getting into town. And so that hot gasoline was the secret, with a speed factor, as far as I could tell, anyway. It was exactly 6 miles from our driveway at home to the intersection on Main Street in town. Driving dizzying speeds to get there was incredibly invigorating. One day, I suddenly got a brainstorm that running 100-octane avgas might increase my engine performance even better than that ethyl. Later, when I talked to my boss Richard about it, he said, "Yeah, give it a try. Might burn your valves a little bit, but probably give you some better horsepower." Anyway, if Mom and Dad knew I was hitting light speeds as I drove into town on that 100-octane avgas, they probably would have gotten gray hairs a lot sooner. Those were good times, though, when age didn't really mean much to everyone on the job. I figured out really quickly that if I carried myself well and worked like a man, I got treated like a man. And that meant a lot to me in those days. Joining me on the show today is Dan King. A couple of weeks ago, Dan posted on social media some of his experiences as a kid working on his dad's drilling rig. We're going to hear about some of his experiences working on that rig, which, according to his perspective, could be considered either a cool or crappy job. We'll let him define that. I've got Dan King here with me on the line. I appreciate you being on the show with me today, Dan. It's really interesting to listen to your perspective on some of the things that we did for work as kids growing up in Idaho. And I think it would be interesting for our listeners to discuss this and talk about some of these jobs, doing dangerous types of things and getting paid for it. And so, Dan, why don't you just jump in and we'll do kind of a intro into what we will call kids doing crappy jobs.
I was an unofficial employee of UD Core Drilling, and Dave paid me under the table.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think there's a lot of ranch kids, farm kids everywhere that understand that. I know that I had my share of that kind of work growing up, and it never occurred to me that it might be dangerous for a kid to be doing this stuff, because we were all treated, and I presume this is the case with you. We were all treated like grown men. This is your job, and get it done, and at the end of the day, you'll clock in or clock out.
Yeah, and you know what, Jeff? I was about 11 or 12 years old when we were doing some work and stuff, and for the first time in my life, my dad talked to me like I was a man.
Right.
And I remember that moment and never forgot it. And you know why? It's because I was working like a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was showing me some dignity.
Exactly. And thank goodness that he is the kind of man who could recognize that and had no problem doing that. I know that the same thing occurred with me with my dad. He we were expected to work hard and to get crap done. And and we were given the dignity and respect deserved for doing that.
Yeah. And I worked, I even had some of the men one time we were out fencing. I had a man throttle me one time. He told me to slow down. He said I was making everyone look bad. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah. I didn't know there was such a thing as ego.
Yeah. So as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, you worked as a core driller's helper with your dad. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as you know, we lived on a ranch in Ledore when my mom married my stepdad, Bobby.
Yeah.
And our ranch was really, it wasn't a producing ranch. It was pretty much a self-sustaining, we lived off of the land, and that was what it produced for us, was a living.
Okay.
And so, you got to have cash. Growing vegetables in a garden doesn't put money in the bank.
Right.
So Dad would do side jobs here and there. And he had a lifelong friend of his there in Ledore was David Udy. And David had a core drilling company. And he would travel around in the summertime and drill holes.
Oh.
And Bobby had learned how to drill years ago when him and Dave were younger and they first started doing this. And Dave had parked this stuff and he'd quit working it for years, but something happened and Dave thought, I'm going to get back into the drilling. So he comes out to the ranch, and my stepdad's nickname was Andy Gump. And he goes, Andy, he says, I'm going to get that old Pee-wee going again, and I need somebody to run it that knows what they're doing. And one thing led to another, and Dad starts drilling, and he's having a hard time keeping drillers helpers, and they wouldn't do their job. And if the driller's having to stop doing what he's doing, then you're not making the footage that you need to make.
Right.
And so uh, Dad just one day I just said, well, something happened, and we were doing a drilling a hole in Lemhi County for a guy, and Dad said, he just grabbed me and said, let's go, let's do this. And
Uh-huh.
so he taught me what to do and stuff. And at the time I was 13 years old,
Uh-huh.
and I just jumped right on it. And you know, and of course I had the heart of, I wanted to help Dad, and I wanted to be a good worker. And so anything he showed me to do, I did it the best I possibly could. And I always paid attention to details so I wouldn't forget, because I
Yeah.
wanted to be a good helper.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, he was sitting up on the hill one day with his binoculars watching me help Dad drill. And he said, well, Andy Gump, I think you found your helper.
So, Dan, maybe for the next couple of minutes, just tell our listeners what it's like um, working as a core driller for a kid.
There's school in the wintertime, but in the summer, I would be off helping Dad core drill.
Wow.
And so that's how I got into it. Let me tell you about a job that we had in Montana. And it was an interesting job. And it kind of explains the process and why we do what we do.
Uh-huh.
We went to work for a contractor. There was a subcontractor for ExxonMobil.
Uh-huh.
And we were doing some drilling up in the mountains, and the terrain was so rough there that we had to get a permit to use a Caterpillar to drag the drill rig up to the site.
Wow.
And then it was quite a rough drive, and so it wasn't going to be feasible to drive in and out every day. And on some jobs, Dad and I, we actually pitched up a camp very close to our drill rigs, and we would just be gone. I'd be living in a camper trailer or a tent
Uh-huh.
throughout most of the summer, and which was a lot of fun to me,
Oh, yeah.
being a teenager and everything. But so on this particular job, we set up our camper trailer at an RV park, and a helicopter would land beside our trailer every day and pick us up and fly us to work.
Wow.
And yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah.
And so anyways, so you get the rig set up, it's got to be level, and you've got to have recovery tanks, and you kind of set up a path for water to flow when it comes out of the hole where your drill rods go in, and you recoup that water.
Uh-huh.
And it goes from a tank, and the sediments settle, and the water in the top flows to another tank. And one of the things that happens when you're drilling into the earth is it's the dirt, and the deeper you get, the more friction you have on your drill rods.
Huh.
And so you control the pH of the water. We would have a caustic solution that you'd mix into the water, and it helps stuff to not stick to the rods, and it keeps them clean.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you put this stuff in, and I forget what it was called back then, but it was basically slime.
Yeah.
It was so slimy. And that all together would keep the rods clean and lubricated.
Oh.
And you wanted to watch you didn't want to drill too hard, because if you did, you would overheat the drill bit. And the drill bit actually had man-made diamonds embedded into it. We had different kinds of bits, but this one we used more than anything.
Uh-huh.
And if you got that bit too hot, it would wipe it out. And if those diamonds are gone, it won't cut no more.
Right.
And so it was about, you want pressure while the drill head's turning, because that's what's forcing the rod down through the earth. But if you drilled too fast, you burn everything up. So,
Yeah.
so you had to watch your water pressure, You had to keep the consistency of your slime just right. And so, it's a bit of a kind of an alchemy process, and the machine against the earth kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so you would run, in the drill. It's like any drill that you have in the house. There's a chuck on there. But in this case, it was like a double chuck with a hydraulic head, and the rod runs right through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's got a hold of that, and the drill head's turning, and it's pushing that rod down, and you get about a couple of feet, and then you stop and the rig and everything, and you release the chucks hydraulically, and raise the head a couple feet, and then you grab a hold of them rods again, and then you start them spinning, and then when you're up to RPM, you put hydraulic pressure on again, you drill another 2 feet, and you just do this. You keep drilling, releasing, grabbing, drilling, releasing, and then after you've drilled about 10 feet, down inside the rod at the very bottom is a core tube. And it has a spring-loaded clip on the end of it that we call a Christmas tree. And it locks into a groove inside of the rod, so that as you're drilling and it's forcing rock up into this, and this is your core samples that you're retrieving.
Okay.
I would encourage people if you're going to go to a university, a college, or whatever, and to get an academic degree, make sure that it's really what you want to do, and that you have an idea how you're going to act on that degree.
Right.
But really, our country, we need engineers. We need people that have skilled labor.
Right.
We need skilled labor.
Yep.
And but it kind of goes back and forth, and a day's going to come where we're going to need. You're always needing various different kinds of skill sets.
Yeah.
And but right now, technical schools is going to get you into a solid job a lot quicker than a college will.
Dan, I appreciate you being on the show today. It's been really interesting to listen to your experiences growing up and working on a core drilling rig. And I think it's really interesting stuff. Anybody who wants to leave comments, if you've had some experiences doing dangerous or what we might call crappy jobs as kids, leave a comment. And if you're interested in discussing some of those things on the show, I'd be happy to call you up and discuss it. So anyway, everyone, be safe out there. Thanks for listening. Growing Up in Idaho, the good old days.